It was not painted a bloody cross color. A one-armed skeleton crawled on the ground in the middle of the wasteland dotted with many skulls and bone fragments, some of which were even hanging from trees. Making creaking noises with its bones that were cracked in many places, it still continued on its way. His name was Jiang Cheng. He used to be a professional gamer. However, now, he had turned into a skeleton. Stretching his only arm forward, trembling he tried to reach for the bone sword that was stuck in the ground in front of him. Even up to this point, he could never understand. His thoughts were not destined to end, as a huge red-clawed paw suddenly stepped right on his already shabby body, scaring the protagonist badly. Crunching his neck, he frightenedly turned his head to see what had happened to him. As it turned out, the situation was not at all rosy, as a huge red wolf loomed over him, its eyes glowing with red light. Huddled on the ground trying to pretend to be dead, Jiang Cheng couldn't understand the reason for his bad luck and why it was happening to him. In 2025, Wasteland's open beta was launched, which, thanks to its realistic gameplay in open game world, nearly sent millions of players into an absolute frenzy. Swords and magic were the objects of fascination and fantasy of a huge number of people around the world, and it was the Great Wasteland that allowed all these human dreams and fantasies to become a reality. It was the game in which thousands of quests and billions of missions are available, allowed many internet players who were on the verge of life and death, to stay within their virtual fantasy. The popularity of the game led to a huge number of orders from the beta testing studio that produced it. And as a result of the countless beta testers who wanted to be the first to master the game, the company was forced to work overtime to satisfy all the players and test the game as soon as possible. And among all the players who joined the beta testing was our protagonist. However, things didn't go according to plan at all. Almost 3 weeks before the game's launch, Jiang Cheng worked almost 42 hours to complete a huge chain of applications. Such a strain on the body had irreversible consequences. Seeing Jiang Cheng's senile demeanor as he sat in the game chair and suddenly clutched his heart with his hand, the company's employees immediately started to sound the alarm and call the others, saying that the guy looked like he was about to die. The employees immediately started yelling that they had to check for equipment to disconnect the guy, because if he died in the game, they wouldn't be able to retrieve the equipment. And that's how our protagonist died. Suddenly, Jiang Cheng heard a voice calling him in a panic, asking what happened to him and why he wasn't moving. Opening his eyes, he saw the face of a girl who in an excited voice tried to bring him to his senses and said that he should move. Adding that if he didn't, she would die right there. When he came to his senses he saw the owner of that voice. It was a girl with yellow hair and a beautiful figure, whose clothes were very torn. Holding a bone staff in her hands, she looked at the protagonist with fear and hope in her eyes. He turned into a skeleton and scratched the back of his head in bewilderment, trying to understand what was going on. Seeing that the skeleton came to his senses, the girl was delighted. However, he did not really care about the words of a strange girl, as his attention was attracted by something more interesting. Despite the girl's panicked screams asking why he had stopped moving again, he stared at the bone pendant around the girl's neck with surprise and interest. Is this the afterlife? The protagonist wondered. However, his curious gaze was interrupted by a loud explosion, causing the ground behind Jiang Cheng and the girl to shuffle with the skeletal remains. Attracted by the noise, they immediately turned around to realize what had happened. The picture that appeared in front of them was quite deplorable, as a huge red zombified wolf of elite rank stood in front of them, holding some skeletons in its mouth and looking at them viciously. After recovering from the shock, the girl immediately shouted to Jiang Cheng that he should quickly stop it. However, he ignored the girl's words and looked at the fearsome monster, thinking to himself, was this zombified wolf the one that could be found in the initial village of the Great Wasteland? After realizing this, it finally came to him, I see, so this isn't the afterlife. As it turned out, this was the starting village of the Great Wasteland, the Wasteland of Death. And the protagonist was reincarnated into the world of the game in an unknown way after his death. Seeing no reaction from the skeleton to the monster, the girl frightenedly asked why he was just looking at him, adding that if he did nothing, they would both die. Looking back and looking at the girl, Jiang Cheng wondered who she was and how dare she tell him what to do. The zombified wolf didn't wait for the two of them to deal with the situation. It immediately rushed at Jiang Cheng and the girl, covering the distance to them with huge leaps. When the girl saw this, she immediately cried out in panic that the monster was approaching them. The huge red wolf opened its jaws and aimed at the boys, intending to finish them off. However, for Jiang Cheng, who was a professional player and who had already killed many of them during the closed beta testing of the game and knew its weak point, which was the neck, this enemy was not a problem. Raising his sword and standing in a stance, he prepared himself for the attack by marking the weak spot to aim at beforehand. Then the moment to strike came. In the next moment, the wolf did not hit the target, while the protagonist was lucky enough to successfully neutralize the enemy. Or it could only appear so at first glance. In fact, in the next moment, Jiang Cheng was confused and noticed that the hand he was striking with had disappeared. The next moment, the monster's huge clawed paw struck right at him. He was thrown high into the sky, not realizing why he was so weak. Falling to the ground and hitting the ground several times, he rolled around on the ground. Lying on the ground strewn in earth and having broken a couple bones and his jaw, an epiphany finally came to the protagonist. "I've finally realized. I've been reincarnated as a fucking novice skeleton soldier." His musings were completely correct, as his body had been summoned by a novice necromancer after reincarnation. Lying on the ground, stretching out his only hand, he reached for his bone sword. However, he was unable to do so as the monster's huge paw stepped on his already not particularly strong body, preventing him from doing anything. As a weak skeleton lying on the ground and being pinned down by a huge zombie wolf that could destroy him at any moment, Jiang Cheng wondered why it had happened like this, and would it really end like this? He had been a professional in his previous life, and had won 2 championships in his youth, leaving behind an amazing record in professional cybersports. At that time, he considered himself the world's biggest hero. However, a car accident changed everything. The trauma of the car accident left the guy's hands indefinitely, resulting in a significant decrease in abrasiveness, which led to the end of his career as a professional player. But that wasn't the only problem. Huge medical bills and a bailout contract that he eventually broke. He eventually had to give up his pride and become a beta tester for the game. And refusing to resign himself to his fate, he died like garbage. As he was dying, he heard the voices of the company's employees, who didn't even bother to call an ambulance, immediately deciding that he was dead. To the guy's surprise, no one was sad about his death, no one cared. The employees were more concerned about the items in his inventory, on which they had spent a lot of their resources, and which would disappear without a trace. Some even wondered if it was worth contacting his family to ask for compensation. Some, knowing that he had won championships before, thought that he had probably died without regrets, which his colleagues readily agreed with. However, Jiang Cheng, whose creation had not yet been completely extinguished, was not going to be so easy to ask. Holding out his hand, he shouted furiously for everyone to back off. "No regrets. I have so many fucking regrets, there's no way I'll accept such a death." Stretching out his hand from which his skin was vaporized to the light, irritatedly said Jiang Cheng. "If only God would give me a second chance." He shouted as he headed towards the light at the end of the tunnel, which was his only hope of salvation. The skin had completely disappeared from his body, leaving behind only white bones. I will take fate into my own hands." Jiang Cheng shouted furiously, then his eyes lit up with purple lightning, and he reached out his hand for his sword with unwavering confidence. As a result, he managed to do so, and he grasped the sword tightly with his hand around which the lightning crackled. Suddenly, he began receiving system notifications that the system had detected a strong will to live. As a result, the divine evolutionary system awakened. More lightning flashed around the protagonist, who continued to lie on the ground. Reportedly, the purpose of this system was to help its user evolve endlessly until they reached the pinnacle and became the strongest being in this world. After which, the system reported that a special gift bag had been activated due to the user's impending death. Even brighter lightning flashed inside Jiang Cheng's skeleton. The huge wolf, watching all this, roared angrily, sensing something dangerous was approaching. In the next instant, the system reported that the user's health had been fully restored. In the next second, the wolf's head was separated from its body with a single swing of Jiang Cheng's sword, who had recovered and decided to do his best to survive. The monster's blood splattered in different directions, but the girl who was watching this did not pay attention to it as she was shocked by the sight she had just seen. The lifeless head of the monster lay motionless on the ground. While on the body of the defeated monster, illuminated by the light pathos, stood a lone skeleton, which despite its size at this point looked like a real protagonist. But it seemed so only from the outside. In fact, standing in the rain that began, he realized that he barely had time, because the buff given by the system ended immediately after the impact. After that, the system reported that he had defeated a level 3 zombified wolf, and that he was rewarded with 10 experience points and 10 evolution points. However, for Jiang Cheng, this was not important right now. Standing in the rain with his hands raised and looking up at the sky, he was relieved to realize that he had survived, which was more than enough for him. Clenching his bone fist, the protagonist noted with a satisfied look that this body wasn't as bad as he thought. At the same time, sitting on her lap, the necromancer girl couldn't believe that the low-level skeleton soldier she had summoned was able to defeat such a strong monster. After that, the system notification window displayed the characteristics of the main character. He was currently level 1, he also belonged to the undead race, his health was 100 points while his magic power was at 0. His attack was 2 points, but when using a sword it reached 5 points. The main and only weapon was a beginner's bone sword. Strength points equaled 100 points while evolution points were only 10 out of a possible 100, there were no skills. The wielder as described by her system was a silly level 1 cutie. At the end, a hint box appeared under the stats, telling me that evolution required another 90 evolution points, then advising me to find a way to quickly earn more evolution points. The Great Wasteland was an open-world game with an extremely realistic style. And also with very elaborate gameplay mechanics. From the mechanics of combat, to the actions of the monsters, which were characterized by artificial intelligence, to realistic mechanics of destruction of objects. There was also the possibility that the player's summoning would undergo mutation. However, such things happened by chance and very rarely. To be more precise, the chance of such a possibility was 1 in a million. The result of the mutation of their summoned creatures became the beginning of rapid growth of players in terms of their level. And killing monsters that far exceeded their level was no longer a dream come true. Looking at the screen of one of the hologram cones that displayed what was happening around her, the girl shrieked in surprise. Looking at all those hologram windows, she finally realized how lucky she was. At the same moment, the blade pierced the head of another zombified wolf, which died before it could do anything. As it turned out, the girl's summoned animal had mutated. Jiang Cheng once again stood pathetically on top of the wolf he had just killed, holding his sword and being illuminated by the orange sunset, which created an epic atmosphere. As a result of killing the wolf, he received a wolf's tooth, which could be equipped or combined with another item. Looking at all the items that fell from the defeated wolves, the girl marveled at how much equipment and materials fell out, which amounted to quite a lot of money. Suddenly, the severed head of a red wolf flew to her, which was quite unexpected for the girl. After coming to her senses and reaching for the wolf's head, the girl said that it scared her quite a lot and that she thought that the monsters were going to attack me. The girl was also very surprised that her summoned creature, which seemed rather weak, managed to kill another wolf so quickly, which made her doubt who was the master and who was the subordinate. Looking at the system window where her stats were displayed, she was surprised to see that even though her summoned creature had mutated, she was still at level 1, which was strange. But even though she didn't level up, it was still very surprising. The protagonist, on the other hand, continued to battle another wolf. Throughout the battles, he was able to adapt to the new body quite well, even though it was just a skeleton. As he cut off the head of the next wolf, Jiang Cheng noticed that the zombie wolves in the newbie zone were no longer a threat to him. Reading the messages sent by the system that he had once again raised a few levels, Jiang Cheng pondered on what it would take for him to continue surviving in this world. Not once in his life had he ever thought that he would be inside a game that had been officially launched not too long ago. The necromancer girl who had summoned Jiang Cheng sat down next to the head of one of the dead wolves and excitedly exclaimed about the amount of materials and how rich she would be. While the protagonist remembered the girl and noted to himself that the girl who had summoned him should have probably been an ordinary player. However, the problem in communication was the lack of vocal cords. But what surprised the protagonist the most was the presence of a system that identified itself as a divine evolutionary system. After reading a hint from the system, which stated that evolution points are gained by hunting monsters and players, the player could then use these points to achieve further evolution. The bonus was that for killing elite bosses, the system gave the player strength points. Since there were currently not enough points, the user could not activate it. Jiang Cheng concluded that he would most likely be able to evolve indefinitely as long as he killed monsters or players. However, it was still a mystery to him what these power points were that could only be obtained by killing bosses. Even though he was participating in the beta testing, Jiang Cheng had never once heard that power points could be used to enhance his weapons, which was interesting news. The fact that a summoned creature had a system and could evolve on its own was even more surprising news. Although for him, who reincarnated into a skeleton soldier, it was a very big chance. What will I become after evolution? Pondered the protagonist, sticking his sword into the ground. Suddenly, a system window appeared behind him, which reported that he had fulfilled all the conditions for evolution, as well as completely exceeding the quota of evolution points, resulting in him having 110 out of 100 evolution points, as well as 100 strength points. Jiang Cheng was quite excited as this was his first evolution. The system, however, asked him if he wanted to use 100 evolution points to evolve into a swordsman skeleton. Standing in front of the choice window, Jiang Cheng realized that he didn't have a choice. So in the next moment, he pressed the confirmation button, deciding that he would see how much this system could help him evolve from the lowest ranked summoning skeleton. After accepting to use the evolution points, the system informed him that evolution was starting, and the very next moment, a flame burst out of the system window. It enveloped the protagonist, forming a huge pillar of fire around him. As soon as he was enveloped by the flames, the system informed him that he was currently evolving, so he would be protected for 3 seconds. After that, messages began to appear in front of him that his health and mana limit had been increased by 80%. Next came the message that all of his stats had been increased by 80%, and he had also received a skeleton swordsman weapon that consisted of bone steel. The flames began to leave, leaving behind a pompous Jiang Cheng, who was holding a sword in his hand and being enveloped by the flames, looking very epic. After the evolution was complete, the system announced that Jiang Cheng had become a rank 2 skeleton swordsman. Looking at the system window that displayed his status, he was pleasantly surprised, as he never thought that his first evolution would help him unlock so many stats. In addition to unlocking new stats, Jiang Cheng also gained a passive skill called Swift Throw. This skill allowed him to use his sword more effectively, in addition to increasing his attack speed by 20%, which could compensate for his lack of skeletal strength. Deciding to test the new skill as well as the weapon, he swung the sword, noting that it suited him perfectly. In addition, with the new sword, even without the skills, his combat power was increasing by leaps and bounds, and was likely much higher than the other players. Looking around for his summoner, Jiang Cheng thought that he should not show that he had his own will. Since if this happened, he would be considered a source of trouble even if he did nothing, but he realized that sooner or later the truth would be revealed, and there was only one way out of this situation, and that was to become stronger as soon as possible. Unlike the world-ranking players and guild players, he must become strong enough to be able to stand alone against at least 100 people. I must become stronger than all of them, concluded Jiang Cheng with a firm conviction. The protagonist's reverie was interrupted by a message from the system, which informed him that he must quickly obtain evolution points. Seeing this, Jiang Cheng resigned himself to the fact that he would have to earn evolutionary pennies by farming monsters in the near future. After looking at the corpses of the wolves, he realized that there was no point in hunting them since they were no longer earning evolution points, so he decided to hunt in another part of the map. The system continued to bombard him with notifications for him to gain points. But before doing so, Jiang Cheng had to clarify something, namely how strong was his bond with the master who had summoned him after reincarnation. Jiang Cheng turned around and looked at the girl who was still sitting on the wolf's lap and still excitedly collecting various materials, exclaiming about how rich she would become, and thought to himself, is she the one I should take with me? Heading towards the girl, who started to say something about a place where there was a system of exchanging items for money, and where the exchange rate was very high. Adding that since the game was just launched, it was a great chance for her to make a lot of money. Approaching the girl, who was very startled by his sudden appearance, but immediately noticed that he was a little different from what he was before, Jiang Cheng immediately noted that she was definitely a new player. After finally breaking away from gathering ingredients and standing up, the girl was surprised and delighted to note that his sword had also increased in level. She proudly declared that since it could change color, it was a mutated summoner. Then rushing over to Jiang Cheng and hugging him tightly, she added in a joyful voice that she was counting on him, then said to wait for her to gather the ingredients, then wait for the new wolves to revive, and then they would kill them again, after which they would be able to get the materials again. Dreamily adding that they would become very rich in just one night. However, the guy was not at all happy with this plan, so he decided to make contact. The girl was not that stupid, and immediately realized what the skeleton wanted. When Jiang Cheng waved his hand again, but pointing in a different direction, the girl asked if he wanted to tell her that they should go somewhere else. After realizing what Jiang Cheng wanted, the girl started crying loudly, saying that she didn't want to go anywhere, because there were so many monsters here, which he was quickly killing. The protagonist on the other hand couldn't believe that the girl was begging her summoned creature. After looking at the system window that showed the time until the wolves respawned, Jiang Cheng came to the conclusion that the players would immediately realize that something was wrong as soon as they saw how short a period of time the monsters were killed here. It would be fine if it was only 1 or 2 players, but he was worried about what would happen if they met a group of high-level players. Killing other players is not forbidden by the rules, and it was considered normal for one player to kill another to steal his loot, but if this girl is killed by someone, I will probably disintegrate to pieces. However, there was a way to deal with newbies like her as well, and so Jiang Cheng had no choice but to do so. Suddenly, the skeleton's arm wrapped around the girl and lifted her off the ground, causing her to exclaim in surprise. Hanging on the skeleton's shoulder. As he carried her away, the girl kept shouting and telling him to put her down on the ground. Asking him why he wouldn't obey her and also yelling that she couldn't leave all those materials behind. Trying to ignore the screams of the girl hanging on his shoulder, Jiang Cheng thought that as a reincarnator, he had no choice but to use his understanding of the various rules of the game to use it to get ahead of the other players. By being the first to kill hidden bosses as well as collecting unspoiled equipment items in the game, Jiang Cheng could be the one to take them all. Confident in his success, he confidently declared, "I've made my decision, we'll start from there." The armored knight blocked the impact of the shield, still couldn't survive the monster's strike. On the ground lay many bodies of players who were dead. The culprit was standing behind them. He couldn't be seen from behind the shadows, but his huge dark silhouette and glowing red eyes were already terrifying. Even though it would be a bit dangerous, Jiang Cheng still decided to do it. It was in the area that was closest to the beginner's area that the hidden dungeon was located. A huge black bear with red eyes and covered in thorns took the newly killed knight in its mouth, which was called the ferocious bear hole. And here are our little girl's stats. Her nickname in the game is just a dumb cutie. She is currently at level 3 and has not yet received specialization. As you might have guessed, her class is necromancer. Her health points are 500, mana 520, attack 90, magic power 121. Her weapon of choice is a novice necromancer's staff. Her skills also include only summoning undead of the first level. The player's total combat power is 66. Pretty strong for a beginner, if you ask me. In the middle of the mountain of ferocious bear, someone's shrill and desperate scream was heard. A guy hanging on a tree was shouting with anger in his voice, asking who could have gotten all the monsters that were gathering around them. The other guy, shouting that they should run away because their leader was dead, ran away in a hurry, leaving his comrades behind. The wounded guy in iron armor panicked and shouted that he should wait for him and not leave him alone. The bear, who was the culprit of the whole incident, let out a loud and angry roar. Left alone with the huge bear, which stood up on its hind legs and looked at him angrily, the wounded guy cried out in panic that he could not die here, because all his equipment, on which he had spent all his money, was here. Suddenly behind him he felt someone's presence. It was a ray of hope as he thought his teammates had come back to save him. Abruptly turning around he shouted joyfully that he knew they were coming back to, but he froze without finishing the sentence. His eye widened at the shock he felt at seeing the creature behind him. And behind it was a skeleton, exuding a gloomy atmosphere and holding a girl on his shoulder who didn't seem to realize what was happening. In the next second, the poor guy with tears in his eyes shouted loudly that it was a ghost. The girl, being frightened by the man's scream again, started screaming for the protagonist to put her down. Suddenly came the notification that the player was subjected to the effect of bleeding, and immediately after it came the notification that he died. Right in front of our couple's eyes, he began to shatter into pieces. When Jiang Cheng saw this, he smirked and said that he had died from simple bleeding. The bear looked at the guys from the side and let out a loud roar. It destroyed trees and anything else in its path and rushed at them. It was a level 7 fierce clawed bear. Seeing the approaching danger, the girl shouted in panic that she had already told him that it was dangerous here, adding that they needed to run away from here soon. Wrapping her arms around Jiang Cheng's head, she said in a panic that she couldn't die here as she would lose all the materials she had collected. Ignoring the girl, Jiang Cheng assessed the situation, noting that his luck was good as there were many dead players everywhere, so no one would be able to stop him. Even though there were more bears hiding in the shadows of the trees behind Jiang Cheng, he was incredibly grateful to the guys who had gathered them all in one place. Since it wasn't just for the kills, but also for the hidden condition, fulfilling which the player could summon a hidden boss. Carelessly throwing the girl to the ground, causing her to shriek painfully. The protagonist turned his back to her, causing her to ask him resentfully why he was trying to rebel against her again, reminding her that she was his master. However, when she looked around, she panicked and noticed that they were surrounded. However, this was great news for Jiang Cheng, as this was what was needed for his plan. The bears came out of the shadows, snarling viciously and glaring hungrily at the couple. When the girl came to her senses and realized the deplorability of their situation, she tearfully begged the skeleton to go somewhere else, but not to stay here. Suddenly, the skeleton standing in front of her suddenly disappeared, attracting her attention. Pulling out his sword, Jiang Cheng speedily headed towards the bear, which opened its huge mouth and started attacking as well. When the girl saw this, she shouted after the skeleton, asking why it was disobeying her. However, he did not hear her words, as he was approaching his target at a great speed. In front of him constantly appeared red notifications that he attracted the attention of the bear. However, this was the main character's goal, as he was going to attract all the bears to him. This was his plan from the beginning, as it would allow him not to worry about the girl. The next step was to use his techniques and understand the monsters. The bear let out a fierce growl and swung its paw. All to kill them all. However, it did not hit the place where the skeleton had been a moment ago, as the skeleton had successfully dodged it. Without even turning around, Jiang Cheng knew how his opponent would act. The bear, just as the protagonist predicted, tried to bite him, but he was able to effortlessly dodge it by jumping into the air. As Jiang Cheng continued to run and dodge the angry bears that could not catch him, he realized that with his current health, he would not be able to withstand more than 2 bear claws. And that was why he had to do it without taking any damage. Jiang Cheng continued to run and dodge the attacks of the bears, which bumped into each other in anger in an attempt to get the main character. Jiang Cheng kept running and dodging the attacks of the bears, who were pouncing on each other in a fit of rage in an attempt to get the protagonist. Those who weren't so lucky. They were hit by their own kin, who, not paying attention to them with anger, pursued the protagonist. Jiang Cheng's fast movements were made possible by the fact that he was a skeleton, as his body was lighter and faster than a normal player. This speed gave him a huge advantage in the battle with the bears, as they were very slow due to their size. However, they also had a weakness. And it was in their heads and ankles. In the next moment, Jiang Cheng activated his quick attack skill, which added 20% to his attack speed, and swung his sword straight at the monster's paw, causing it to let out a painful roar. Without stopping, he continued to attack the bear's weaknesses, using his speed advantage to cut through all of its tendons. The defeated bear was no longer able to stand on its feet and fell to the ground. After pausing for a second, Jiang Cheng turned towards the bears that were now crippled and no longer able to stand on their feet. Then he headed towards them, intending to attack their vital points to completely cut off their agony. Since this way, he could deal twice as much critical damage, which allowed him to kill them faster. However, there is a reason why fierce-clawed bears are called rookie killers. And that reason was that if a bear was wounded even once, it had a chance to activate its skills. Their special skill was the lightning skill, which they only activate in extreme cases, and which can instantly completely paralyze the player. Standing in a stance and holding his sword in his hand, the protagonist stood waiting for the monster to attack. In the next moment, a pillar of light from lightning rained down on him. The bears, after being hit while the players were paralyzed, began to rush forward to finish off the enemy. It was because of this strategy that they earned the title of Rookie Killer. Seeing that her skeleton was being attacked by lightning, the girl, realizing that he would not be able to withstand it, bravely rushed to his aid, waving her staff. However, both to her and to the surprise of the bear, who attacked the protagonist, he put his sword on his shoulder and stood pathetically in the middle of the pillar of lightning that rained down on him. There was only one thing about the attack that the bear didn't see coming. It was that the paralysis didn't work on skeletons, because the skeleton had no blood or flesh. So there was no way to paralyze it. Jumping high into the air and raising his sword above his head, Jiang Cheng thrust his sword with all his might at the head of the bear, which had no time to react to his attack, because after his lightning attack, there was a gap in its defense, during which it became defenseless. And this time was more than enough time to attack its vital points to inflict critical damage. The necromancer girl, while holding her staff in her hands with her mouth open in surprise, was shocked by what she saw. Pulling out his bloody sword from the monster's body, he looked at the other bears, who saw the death of their kin and snarled angrily at him, while thinking that memorizing the fierce bear's patterns had been a great decision long ago, because of the unique characteristics of its skeleton. He could kill it without taking any damage. Suddenly, the system window reported that 50 evolution points had been gained, as well as 30 experience points, which was an excellent reward for Jiang Cheng. Encouraged by the great reward, he decided that he would continue to gain points for further evolution. After that, he could try to kill the hidden boss. Jiang Cheng continued to attack the remaining bears while the girl watched from the sidelines. Suddenly, she received a system notification that she had obtained level 4. Jumping with happiness, she was happy that she had such a beautiful skeleton, and also noting his movements, which seemed very fast and smooth to her. Watching him fight, she couldn't find the right words to describe what it was like and what she had seen before. Namely, the play of a legendary world player who had been invited to beta test the game. That player was Jiang Cheng, who had godlike movements that were the same as her skeleton. The girl couldn't believe her conclusions, as they seemed beyond fantasy to her. However, without coming to the right conclusion, she said with a happy smile that it was probably an Easter egg from the developers, especially for Jiang Cheng. At the same time, in the background, the fate of the bear was being decided, who with tears in his eyes had already started to beg for forgiveness. Noticing that the skeletal man was looking more and more cool, she looked away in embarrassment and told herself that now was not the time to think about it, as she was the one who had managed to summon him. Looking around the battlefield, the girl noted with delight that there was a whole place full of gold and materials. Crawling on all fours and peering into the bear's mouth, the girl decided that since luck was on her side and she could summon such an amazing creature, she would make the most of it. Continuing her treasure hunt inside the bear, the girl said lastly that her little skeleton could do anything, and the future depended only on it. After looking at the bears that were still alive and checking how many points he had left, the protagonist came to the conclusion that he would probably be able to reach the next evolution in the near future. But suddenly his mood was interrupted by a system message praising him for his breathtaking strength. After which, under Jiang Cheng's perplexed gaze, a message appeared saying that the new evolution route had been unlocked. After which, 3 choices appeared in the system window, through which one could go with a certain amount of points. This turn of events surprised the protagonist quite a lot, as he would never have thought that a hidden evolutionary route could exist at all. As expected of a hidden route, it cost twice as much as a normal evolution. After deciding that he would choose the hidden route, Jiang Cheng concluded that he would need more time to gain points. However, high risks often meant high rewards. But in order to find the hidden boss, he needed to first kill all the monsters in the area. Then clicking on the hidden path selection icon, he received a message that the evolution path had been successfully selected. Raising his sword in front of him, with a determined look, Jiang Cheng headed towards the bears, promising himself that he would definitely open the hidden path. Then turning to the bears, he asked those bears if they were also curious about what the hidden evolution was like. But the answer was only tears from the bears who realized who they had messed with. From afar, it was clear that something was happening in ferocious Bear Mountain. Flocks of alarmed birds were rising anxiously above the trees and the sound of battle echoed through the valley. One by one, the ferocious bears died from Jiang Cheng's sword, unable to even scratch him, he was so fast. The ground shook as another bear ran at our hero with all its anger. And when it was about to grab him with its mouth, our skeleton finished off this bear with one precise blow, which could not be helped by its strength or its fury. Jiang Cheng destroyed these creatures one by one, and each time he became stronger and stronger. Hundreds of bears felled by his hands lay on the battlefield. Over and over again, the system's information window appeared, telling him that he had gained 10 evolution points and 10 experience points. Finally, the seemingly endless stream of monsters stopped and our skeleton stuck his bloody sword into the ground so that nothing would interfere with his research into his characteristics and skills. Finally, the last creature, he thought as he stood in the middle of the battlefield and opened the system's information windows. His skills grew with each level he gained and he felt like he was moving too slowly and not at all prepared for the danger ahead. With each level he gained, the number of evolution points he received from killing monsters dropped significantly, and so it was not entirely surprising to him that he was 20 evolution points short of the next evolution, and it irritated him greatly. What bad luck to be only 20. But there was something else he and his companion had gotten from these bears, and he looked around. The entire clearing was littered with bear corpses, each with an information box above it that told him what resources he could gather from them. From one bear you could take 5 copper coins and 1 bear crystal. Because he had destroyed all the bears, a countdown began, indicating the time for the new wave of bears to revive, so they should hurry. He was disappointed that he hadn't managed to get the number of points for the next evolution that he needed, but he was reassured by the fact that he had managed to kill all the bears in the required time with the required level. He leaned over the level 5 bear, looking at its loot. Suddenly, an information window appeared, urging him to be careful because a hidden boss appeared nearby. A mysterious portal opened from which the boss of the mountain bears was to appear next. But our skeleton was not afraid at all and was even glad of this opportunity. He watched the portal with interest. Jiang Cheng was going to come closer and take a look. The requirements to trigger the appearance of this hidden boss were incredibly strict, as only players up to level 10 who could kill all the bears in 45 minutes had the opportunity to summon it. Therefore, our hero, not wanting to lose this opportunity, quickly began to move to the place where the portal appeared. Jumping between the trees, he thought that with such strict requirements, it would be even more difficult for other players to find out that there was a hidden boss at this location. He was right, the boss was already here and his huge silhouette with red eyes was definitely meant to be terrifying. This bear was a ruler, even the king of the Bear Mountains, and for good reason. It was many times bigger than other bears and covered with claws sticking out in all directions, plus it was even level 15. Jiang Cheng hid behind one of the trees and watched this giant, thinking that it was good that this low-level boss did not attack until the player came into his line of sight. This played into the hands of our skeleton and gave us additional opportunities for strategic maneuver. But another question he was concerned about was whether he was considered a player by the game or not. And he was about to clutch his sword and go and test his guesses when another thought stopped him. Jiang Cheng couldn't just go for a frontal attack, because this boss had a large number of problematic skills that are incredibly difficult and tiring for new players, and so if he just relied on his speed and experience and directly attacked the boss, the chance of him not getting into trouble was very slim. He continued to hide behind the tree and try to recall the beta test in more detail. Back then, this king of mountain bears had been relentlessly pursuing him, and now he was trying to remember which skill of this ferocious clawed bear boss was the most dangerous for him. But he couldn't remember anything else, and so he decided to give up this futile task. He just remembered that this boss's skill was troublesome to deal with. After all, there are too many small bosses in this game at the beginning of the game, and he just couldn't remember all of them. And Jiang Cheng dejectedly walked back, leaving the boss alone, hoping to return when he reached the next level of evolution. He returned to the clearing with the dead bears, where the timer said that there was still 1 hour and 20 minutes left before new bears appeared. He could only wait for the next batch of monsters to be reborn. While he was waiting, he noticed something else. There was one thing he could feel, and it intrigued him quite a bit. It was as if an invisible energy thread connected the yogi to the girl who had summoned him. And now he wondered if all the other summoned beings felt the same way, this thread of energy through the forest showing him the way to his conditional hostess. He felt this connection quite strongly. Jiang Cheng decided to go back to her. Walking through the forest, he reflected that after being reincarnated as a summoned being, he had always felt that something connected the two of them to that girl. And he had better find her first now, just in case. Even though there was a distance between them, he thought he could see her and have a sense of what she was doing. Images of the girl continuing to collect items from the bears with a happy smile ran through his mind. When he reached the very clearing where the girl was, he was almost not surprised that she was still there and still looting the corpses. Suddenly, he heard voices approaching. Jiang Cheng watched from the bushes as a group of players entered the neighboring clearing. One of them turned to the leader of their group with the obvious remark that all the monsters seemed to have disappeared and asked if it could be a bug. The other noticed how cleanly they were all killed. The leader, who seemed to be the most experienced of them all, told them that they were idiots, and the reason for the absence of monsters was that someone had already killed them all. And he pointed to the bear corpses that were scattered everywhere. They were all wondering who the hell had dared to kill all the monsters in their tiger hunting guild's territory. They wondered if it could be people from the Brawler Guild. One of them emotionally began to convince the others that he had heard that the deputy leader of their guild was saying that people from the Brawler Guild were trying to take some of their territory, and that the guild master had told them before that if they met any of them, they would. But the leader of their group interrupted him and threatened to kill him if he dared to tell the guild master about this incident. He agreed, frightened, and promised to keep his mouth shut. Having dealt with this, the guild master sent his subordinates to inspect everything nearby, because since the bodies of the bears were still there, the person who did it was probably still around. He warned them that if they didn't find the person who did it and report back to the guild master, they would be in trouble. They had to find them. And all the players in this group ran in different directions to search. One of them went along the forest path and looked around and thought to himself that their leader only knows how to command others. Let him try to find someone in these trees and bushes. He was scared because he was afraid to meet the bear himself, if they were still here, because he was sure that they would gather in a pack and devour him in a moment, and he would feel so sorry for the money he had spent on his equipment. But then he heard shouts. "I am rich! I am rich!" The player ran out to the clearing where a girl was sitting in awe, looking at the rare materials she had dropped from the monsters. She was excited about how much money she could earn in exchange for them. He shouted, calling the rest of his group over here, "It's the player, I found him." The poor girl was terrified by this turn of events. They asked her where she was from. Who was she? Why did she enter the territory of their guild? But his group was already approaching, and the leader told him to calm down and asked him what was wrong. He told him that he had found someone suspicious. The girl was surprised that this player was not the only one there. She unsuspectingly told them with an embarrassed but polite smile that she was just looking for her skeleton, which had run away from her, and she was here to find it. The leader of the group did not believe her at all and replied that it was the first time he had heard that a summon could run away from the one who summoned it, so he advised her to stop pretending and tell them where the rest of her team was hiding. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about and asked, "Team?" But then she answered that she didn't have a team and was only here with her summon. He then ordered one of his teammates named Shadow Bird to capture her by going into battle mode with her to prevent her from escaping or killing herself to go offline. He happily agreed with a mean smile and was going to interrogate her to find out the location of her team. She prepared for the battle without understanding what they wanted from her and what they were trying to do. To which Shadow Bird replied that he loves those who try to fight back. However, before that, he used his investigation skill and found out that the girl was not lying. He told everyone that she was just a 9th-level necromancer and her skeleton summon had slow speed and low attack, and he highly doubted that she could kill even one bear by herself. And looking at the wounds of the dead bear, he added that they all looked neat and precise, as if they were made by someone who is very good with a sword. And then he added that he had found out something else important about her. She really wasn't part of the team. She wasn't going to give up her loot even if they beat her to death. So they came to the conclusion that this location was definitely cleared by someone else, and she was just a looter who accidentally entered the bear's territory. A small note, in this game, looters are low-level players who follow the teams that clear locations and they pick up the loot that is left behind. They are also called money grabbers, because very often looters become people who make money from games by selling items from the game, such as rare skins, rare loot and materials. Then the leader told them, "Okay, she's all yours," for which his subordinates thanked him dirty laughing. However, he took the other 3 and went to look for the team that had cleared the location. And those who were forced to leave were very disappointed that they were missing out on such fun. Shadow Bird was about to start his game and laughing, he started circling around her quickly, assuring her that if she ran away, he would kill her. The girl began to shake with fear when he asked her if she knew what was the most realistic part of the Great Wasteland. The poor girl wondered in her mind where her little skeleton was when she needed it. And the bad guy answered his own question, it was the sense of touch. There was already an unimaginable horror behind him that he could not yet imagine. Jiang Cheng put his bony hand on the scoundrel's shoulder, causing him to turn around in surprise. And in a moment, a scream flew across the clearing. The astonished team of scoundrels turned around in amazement. What? How could this be? How could the skeleton warrior ambush Shadow Bird? The girl with tears in her eyes rejoiced at the return of her skeleton and assured that she had played as long as she could, but she could not do it anymore. Shadow Bird was screaming in pain, he now had no arm. His team ran to help him, not understanding how this could happen. Jiang Cheng quickly lifted the girl on his shoulder and ran with her as far as he could. Looking into their wake, the villain who lost his arm began to realize who killed all those bears. It seems it was really the summon of this necromancer. The leader of the team was furious, cursing at how easily they had been fooled by that girl. His subordinates were confused and asked what they should do. What a disappointment it was for them. Now that she had escaped, they had nothing to bring to the guild master. The leader shouted, "Chase them." And once again the frightened birds flew over the restless forest. He kept shouting for them to run in the direction the fugitives had fled. Meanwhile, our hero ran forward with all his might with the girl on his back, who was very happy that he had come back for her, because she had not expected to see him again. But then the leader of the villains ran right at them and tried to make them stop with threats. The girl offered to put him on the ground, as she could run and help him in the battle. The skeleton without vocal cords could not answer her in any way, but continued to carry her. He just looked at her with his eyes, so to speak. The girl, not having received an answer, began to think that perhaps this was the reason why he did not want to leave her. She thought with a happy and shy face that maybe he had some feelings for her. Even though he was a small skeleton, he didn't look bad from a distance. But he is still a skeleton after all. Before she could finish her amorous thoughts, the skeleton unceremoniously threw her into the nearest bushes and ran on. The girl could not find the censored words to ask him why he did this to her. If not for the leaves that were clogging her mouth, she would have definitely attracted too much attention. But she was lucky and her pursuers didn't notice her in the bushes and just ran past, focused on the skeleton. She finally realized why he had left her behind, to stay safe until he could lead the pursuers away. Our hero realized that he had no choice but to attack them, because otherwise they would not just let him go. He turned around and looked at them and began to quickly assess them. Among them was a guy who specialized in close combat to put pressure on the enemy and a ranged warrior to scout and disrupt enemies. They were really a team that was created with the purpose of killing other players and looting their bodies. Luckily, the previous attack made their archer lose the ability to fight, and judging by his expression, this bastard is very weak mentally. So our hero decided that he had a pretty good chance of winning and turned around and ran to meet the enemies. When he stopped in front of them, they finally noticed that the girl had disappeared, but they didn't really care because the fact that the skeleton was here meant that she was not far away. The leader was still cursing and couldn't believe that they had been fooled by this girl again. He never could have thought that she would be able to order her summon around easily. He warned his team to be alert to their surroundings, as she was probably hiding around here somewhere. He still couldn't believe that she was able to defeat so many monsters in such a short period of time by herself, and the main question that bothered him was why she did it. Was she trying to raise her level, or was she just trying to get materials? He felt that something was wrong. The darkness of the portal glowed behind the skeleton, and this part of the forest made the team leader's skin crawl. He thought they should find out more before attacking. The leader called out to the archer to use his skills to investigate and check the surroundings, but he did not respond and seemed to be completely out of control. Because the next moment he threw his quiver of arrows to the ground. And with the words "How dare summon" cut off his arm, he was going to throw poison knives at the skeleton. The skeleton just stood in front of them and did not move, while the archer was furious and was going to kill this skeleton no matter what. His team, realizing the danger of the ambush, could not calm him down. The skeleton began to smile its terrifying smile, as if mocking them. Jiang Cheng was fully prepared to repel any attack, and he was waiting for it. Shadow Bird couldn't stand such impudence and threw his poison-throwing knives at him with all his fury. This was exactly what our hero expected, and he easily deflected them with one swing of his sword. They had already fallen into the trap he had prepared. The archer repeated his attack again, with a similar result, but the others saw that he was just standing there and defending himself and began to think that there was no ambush, and in this case, it would be better if they attacked first and killed this summon with shouts. They ran to attack it as a team. The leader was going to strike first with his massive hammer. He ordered to kill this skeleton and then find the girl. At the same time, our hero wondered why the boss hadn't reacted yet. He managed to dodge the crushing blow, which was strong enough but slow. The boss noticed that the skeleton was really fast. Too fast for a low-level skeleton that should have a slow reaction. Suddenly, the knives thrown by the archer hit the portal. Immediately, a message appeared in front of the whole team that they had been spotted by the hidden boss of ferocious Bear Mountain, the king of Bear Mountain. The whole team was shocked. How could this be? What the hell is this? They couldn't believe what was happening. This was the first time they had ever heard of him. What kind of hidden boss? Meanwhile, he was approaching them without delay. And in a moment he tried to attack them from above. The other team members did not know what it was, only their leader realized that this was the boss the deputy head of their guild was looking for. However, he didn't understand why this boss attacked them. He panicked and yelled at them to scatter and dodge this attack on the area that was about to happen. They barely had time to jump aside when the boss hit the ground with incredible force, like a meteor, scattering pieces of earth, rocks, and dust. It seemed that everyone had escaped, but it turned out that the wounded Shadow Bird did not have time to react, and a message appeared on the screen that the player was dead. The team leader still didn't understand why this boss appeared so suddenly. He wondered if that girl could have been his initial target or if he was here from the beginning. But this boss didn't give him much time to think. He used his skill, Berserker Roar. And that was enough for the whole team to start running away as fast as possible, screaming that they couldn't take it anymore, and one of them stayed a little longer. And suddenly they all froze and started to lift off the ground. They didn't know why they suddenly started to fly and what kind of gravity manipulation it was. It turned out that it was another boss skill, Sandstorm Domain, which first lifted enemies above the ground and then blocked their ability to move. The unfortunate one who stayed closest to the bear began to panic that he couldn't get free. The leader, who was also immobilized, advised him to raise his shield and try to withstand the blow. Jiang Cheng stood to the side and calmly watched the scene. He had already remembered that this boss had two main skills, Berserker Roar and Sandstorm Domain. and they were really difficult to deal with, especially for beginners. Meanwhile, the bear successfully broke through the poor guy's defense and threw away his shield. Then it grabbed him with its mouth under the frightened gazes of his teammates. The hero knew that the boss's entry-level skills didn't last long, so he wanted to see how they would hold up against him. The leader was furious and disappointed. He thought that that girl had beaten them again. She knew exactly what the boss was here and had deliberately lured them here using her skeleton as bait. He was paralyzed and couldn't run anywhere while the bear was approaching him. He looked to the side and noticed the skeleton. He wondered if that girl was really still here and watching them die here. When he had already given up any hope of saving himself, the boss' skill suddenly stopped and disappeared. He realized that this was his chance to escape. There were only 2 of them left and they were running fast away from this terrible bear. They had lost so much, all because of this boss. Before that he thought no one would ever find him. They had to retreat quickly and report back to the guild leader that they had found the hidden boss. But suddenly a shadow ran by them in the bushes. The leader wondered where the skeleton had gone. They were distracted and in the next moment both of them were beheaded with a sword, so fast that they didn't even have time to react. 2 information windows appeared with the words, "Player dead." The leader could not believe what had happened. How could he be killed by a summon? He was so angry, and there was nothing he could do. He looked at the skeleton and knew for sure that he was going to report it and the girl who summoned it, as well as the hidden boss. The head of their guild must know about all these problems, and then these 2 would definitely be hunted down and destroyed for daring to challenge them. The team of villains was destroyed, but the hidden boss did not go anywhere and now, breaking trees, he was rapidly approaching our hero, who was standing with his back to him and waiting. An information window appeared in front of him that he had received 20 evolutionary points. Then the next one appeared, informing him that he had successfully gained the required number of evolutionary points. Does he want to evolve? And a moment before he was swallowed by the bear's huge mouth, he clicked yes. As soon as he pressed the yes button, a blue lightning bolt struck him. The impact was so strong that the stones flew away from him. Jiang Cheng, after evolving, already had enough strength to stop the boss bear's mouth from swallowing him. An information window appeared, informing him that he had 3 seconds of defense left after evolving, and he was now ready to fight the boss. The countdown began. Another window appeared, telling him that he had evolved into a rank 3 skeleton and was now a close combat striker. He also received the skill, a combat striker's bone armor, arrow arm guard form. And now the defense time has passed. At the same moment, he jumped up and made 2 crossed blows to the bear's paw. He was able to dodge the bear's attack and make 2 strikes himself. His swift draw has leveled up to the 2nd level, attack speed has increased by 40%, Jiang Cheng was very pleased with this attack speed. He stepped back a bit to assess his opponent and have room to maneuver. The hidden boss, the king of the bear mountain, has a bear monster constitutional form, so his weakness remained in his tendons and neck. Our skeleton was fully prepared for battle and had a purple aura around him like Susanoo. He mentally said to the boss, "Come, let me test your strength and power." It seemed that the boss understood his thoughts because he fiercely squinted his red eye. He rushed at the skeleton with incredible strength and threw it far away with his paw. Jiang Cheng was forced to admit that he was fast. In flight, he realized that even though he had evolved, he was still not strong enough to withstand frontal attacks, but fortunately, his new skill, combat striker's bone armor, arrow arm guard form, opened up new possibilities for him. The new skill allowed him to attack his enemies from afar with bone arrows, and he took advantage of it. He shot a dozen arrows right into the creature's face near the eye, causing it to howl in pain. Jiang Cheng landed on his feet in an epic fashion, recovering from the bear's blow. He was about to attack again, but was forced to stop. An information window appeared, warning that the king of the bear mountain was about to activate his sandstorm domain skill. Jiang Cheng was annoyed. This skill again. Our hero knew that under the influence of his gravitational field, everyone was attracted to the boss and could not escape, and now his actions were somewhat limited. After the skill ended, the bear would definitely try to strike him. He had to think of something. And he came up with something specifically for this case. He activated his bone arrows again. Although he could not aim properly, it did not matter. Because due to the action of gravitational magic in a large radius, all the arrows he fired were guided and attracted to the target. And under the influence of this force, his arrows simply could not fail to hit the target. Then, instead of resisting the action of gravitational magic, he ran to meet it, picking up speed and hiding from the bear's sight and slipping under its belly. Then he used the gravitational field and gravitational force to get more power to attack the monster's belly. He quickly flew under the bear like an arrow and slashed its stomach as if he was going to eviscerate it. But the boss wasn't going to die. He used his skill again, Sandstorm Domain, lying helplessly on his stomach. This time, the skill's power was greater and it even tore up the surrounding trees and chunks of earth. Jiang Cheng noticed that the strength of the gravitational field had increased and this was a sign that it was the bear's last desperate effort to win. But there was one more thing, our skeleton had few bone arrows left. So we had to finish everything manually. He jumped on a piece of land and flew in the direction of the bear. He was determined to finish everything here and now. He flew forward to meet the monster's open mouth, which was ready to close forever. Jiang Cheng fired the last of his arrows to distract the boss a bit before his main attack. They again hit the beast's face, which roared in pain. And then he plunged his sword with all his might into the creature's only intact eye, which, in incredible pain, was able to stand up again and paw the skeleton away. The gravity skill had just expired and our hero could move freely again. He looked at the boss, who in his current state could not see anything and had no doubt that he would inevitably die. Jiang Cheng really appreciated his new skill that was helping him so much. The new bone arrows slowly began to grow back, but it turned out that he needed bone powder to fully and quickly recover. But his thoughts were stopped by the voice of his boss speaking to him, "Player. I've been waiting for you for a long, long time." The hero was shocked by this turn of events. When did the bosses start talking? Then he continued, Jiang Cheng realized that something was wrong. The early bosses in the game were not supposed to interact in-game with the players. What was going on? The bear continued, "I want to give you the last present of the ferocious bear mountain to you." He began to emit energy in the form of blue lightning bolts from his crystal on his forehead. An inscription appeared warning that the king of the bear mountain is about to activate its skill, 1,000 lightning strikes. Please pay close attention and avoid it. Jiang Cheng didn't even know what to say at this turn of events. How come the game's public release added a voiceover to the new skill? The boss was finalizing his preparations and getting ready to use his last skill. Our skeleton asked himself why this boring game is filled with such unnecessary things. But since this is a special skill, then he would stop being careful and polite and finish it all right now. He was so confident because he, as a skeleton, was immune to lightning attacks. When a powerful blue lightning bolt struck him, the whole forest was illuminated with blue light. Meanwhile, the girl was worried about her little skeleton and hurried to help him. She was overloaded with crystals that she had collected from the dead bears, and so her speed was reduced by 40%. But she was still hurrying as fast as she could, worried that something had happened to him and that was why he hadn't returned for so long. She was still delighted that he had taken these players away from her. And she gradually threw away the crystal and ran in the direction of the battle noise. The girl was sure that only she could save him. But something flew right at her from above and she looked at it in surprise. It was the head of the already dead boss and king of the Bear Mountain. She couldn't even move in surprise and the head fell right on top of her, kicking up a pile of dust. Information windows appeared informing her that the first kill of the hidden boss of the Bear Mountain has been achieved by the player, just a dumb cutie. She had raised her level and was now level 10 and was now prompted to go to the main town and choose a specialization. Here is the information card of our skeleton at the moment. He, along with his owner, also reached level 10 and increased his stats significantly.